Hey guys, it's Steven, and you may be thinking, why does his background look so different? And it's because I'm currently traveling and I'm stuck in a hotel room and I can't stream much. So I figure, why don't I spend some time making a couple videos about some things that I'd kind of like to opine on a little bit. And one of the things that I hear a lot of people talk about in the software development world, engineers, quality people. If you don't know, my day job is actually as a quality engineer. I do a lot of automated and manual testing for a web application. And one of the things that often comes up a lot in the quality and the development space, especially when you're having the two sides discussing each other's work, is this idea of test-driven development. And a very big evangelist of this idea was a gentleman by the name of Kent Beck with a book called Extreme Programming. And he talked a lot about how you should apply this approach to your development workflow to have uh, better outcomes, essentially. And the general idea, I'm sure a lot of you have heard this before, the general idea of this is that you are supposed to first write tests against your code that validates some sort of behavior. You're supposed to then run those tests and see those tests actually fail. And then you're supposed to implement code that makes the test pass. And you're supposed to ideally implement the least amount of code that makes the test pass. And you just repeat that cycle over and over again. And the idea here is that it's supposed to help you keep you focused on satisfying the actual behavior and the requirements that you need, and not necessarily on writing overly abstracted, overly complex, or unnecessary code as you go. And obviously writing more correct code that has fewer bugs and needs less rework. And honestly, it may sound like, based on the way I'm talking, it may sound like that I disagree or that maybe I don't find value in it. But honestly, this is the way that I like to develop, where I feel the most productive and the most confident is when I'm doing some sort of variation of test-driven development. What I want to add to the conversation is something that I think often gets lost when you start having this conversation, because like with any topic, there's usually two extremes. There's people who are totally for it, and there are people who are trying trying to get rid of it altogether. Um, and I sit somewhere in the middle. I That tends to be a position I have in life quite a bit. I think this idea of being able to hold two competing ideas in your head at the same time is really important. And so I tend to try to err on the side of trying to understand both sides of the coin and take the positive and leave the negative. So my I'm just going to speak from my personal workflow, my personal approach to how I use test-driven development, how I apply it, when I use it. And I think this might change the way you look at it. Instead of it being something you always have to do, maybe you're more open to the fact that, yes, I want to do test-driven development, but it's also okay, and I also have permission to not do it at times too. So I basically kind of have this idea of there's really two distinct phases for me personally when I'm building something or implementing something. And those two phases really I can kind of categorize into two groups. The first group is really about exploration. And I know everyone's workflow is a little bit different. That text is way too small, so let me blow it up there. But exploration is the first bucket I'd put things into. Exploration is about being asked to solve a problem and not completely understanding the problem or the available solution. And so in my personal workflows, I tend to need to write code to do this exploration. I tend to need to write code that I will likely throw away or that I will largely get rid of or change. But the purpose of writing the code in the first place is to try to figure out what it is I know and what it is I don't know. And as I write more and more code, as I explore the problem space more, I start to find the edges of the problem space. I start to figure out, okay, this is clearly defined, And now I sort of understand the different trade-offs that can be made to solve this and how I can approach solving it. And at that point, that's when I will kind of say you cross over into what I'll refer to as kind of the second bucket of activity in any given project, where now I've kind of walked into the implementation side of things. This is where now the rubber's meeting the road. Now I understand the problem. Now I can talk intelligently about the different solutions, the different trade-offs, the pros and the cons, because everything is ultimately a trade-off. And now I've kind of settled in on what I think is the ideal initial implementation, the actual behavior we want out of a system, the actual problem we're going to solve and how we're going to solve it. And now I want to start encoding that behavior. I want to start having the ability to depend on behavior and ensure and assure the behavior. And at this point, this is where I think, for my own personal workflows, test-driven development adds a whole lot of value, because at this point, when I get into the implementation phase of things, this is where now I don't want to have to test my application end to end every single time I make a change. Now I want to have tests that I can run very reliably, very quickly, very repeatably, that assures me any recent changes I made haven't destroyed or broken any of the work or the progress I made, maybe over the last several hours or maybe over the last several days. And so it's at this point when I need to recognize, okay, tests are important. I need to have a test project. I need to have a test framework. I need to actually start sitting down and following that loop that I showed earlier in this picture, where I first write the test to test the code, it fails, and then I implement the actual code that's going to provide that behavior, because now I have a good idea of the right abstractions or the right bits of code or the way to architect my code. And it makes a lot more sense to me, because honestly, when I'm in the early phases and I'm exploring a problem, 9 times out of 10 I am going to choose the wrong abstractions. I'm going to choose the wrong architecture. And so early on, if I start weighing that exploration down, that R&D kind of activity down with a lot of test-driven development, every time I want to change something or explore something new, it means I have to go and change all that test code, and I have to refactor all that test code as well, which again it's not necessarily bad, because in the future, when you get something into production and you make a production code change, and that requires you to refactor your tests, that's a forcing function to say, should I have to refactor my tests? Are my tests brittle? Or did I take the wrong approach with my code change? Did I break some sort of user space or some sort of API contract that I shouldn't have? In that situation, that's a good thing. But in this exploration phase, it's often not helpful and oftentimes limiting. So just to kind of summarize, this is kind of the way I think about my work, and when I'm approaching a problem, is I kind of break it down into these 2 distinctly different things, where in one phase, the initial exploration, research and development, whatever term you want to use, I'm not really worried about doing this test-driven development, this really disciplined approach to always write a test and always follow that red, green, red approach to my workflow. But as I near the exit phase of this exploration, if you can kind of imagine this green bar or this green square that I'm moving as sort of me moving through these phases, as I start to near that better understanding of the problem space and how I actually want to tackle something, I need to stay aware of that and need to be aware of when I sort of cross from, man, I don't really know what I'm doing, and I'm not sure about this. When I start to feel like, okay, yes, I see, now it's coming together. When I start to have that feeling, that realization that I'm moving from, okay, now I was exploring the problem, and now I'm actually implementing a solution to the problem, a very concrete implementation. Now it's like, stop, go back, do the work to set up my test project, set up my test framework, whatever technologies and tools you're going to use to do that, have those in place, and start following that good test-driven development workflow. Again, I don't mean this to be authoritative. I more mean it to offer a contribution to this discussion of should you or shouldn't you use test-driven development. and just share how I think about it and how I approach it. I don't beat myself up when I don't use it in the exploration phase, but I also hold myself accountable that I do write tests and I do apply myself to having a good solid test suite once I do get into the actual implementation activity. So I hope you found that helpful. This is a different kind of video than I've done. So if you like this, if you'd like me to keep doing more of these types of videos where it's much more of Stephen running his mouth about something, leave me a comment or find me on Bluesky. I'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, hopefully I'll get out of this hotel room at some point and be back on the lives and back at home with my normal setup. But I appreciate you guys watching, and I hope you're having a great day, and I'll see you next time.